The US Supreme Court's hearing of arguments whether the former president, Donald Trump, is immune from prosecution for actions he took while president has just ended within the last hour or so. The outcome will determine whether he should face trial on charges that he plotted to overturn his 2020 election defeat. The ruling in this case won't affect his criminal trial currently underway in New York, where he's facing charges of making hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels. Correspondents say that even before his day in court began, Mr. Trump was out on the campaign trail in New York, meeting construction and union workers and repeating some of his talking points and campaign rhetoric, including nicknaming his trial the Biden trial, even though it is a state case with no connection to the Department of Justice.
Every single expert, every legal scholar, every respected scholar has said this is no case. There is no case here. This is just a political witch hunt. Thank you very much.
How are you feeling about the Supreme Court argument, Mr. Trump? Are you ready to do this in the argument tonight?
I think that the Supreme Court has a very important argument before it today. I would have loved to have been there, but this judge would not allow that to happen. I should be there, but he wouldn't allow it to happen. I think he puts himself above the Supreme Court, which is unfortunate, isn't it? But the argument on immunity is very important. The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future, for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president. You're just going to be doing nothing. You're not going to take any of the risks, both good and bad. I mean, you're going to make some great decisions and save the country, and you're going to make some decisions which are unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But you're not going to do anything if you don't have immunity, because otherwise you're going to be prosecuted. I'm going to go in now and sit in front of a case, election interference. This is the way they think they're going to get elected. But I guess, based on what I'm looking at, it's driving up my poll numbers, not driving them down. Thank you very much.
Donald Trump. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from London by the Republican strategist Greg Swenson. Mr. Swenson, lovely to see you again. It's been a wee while, but thank you so much for joining us. And as we mentioned at the intro there, the Supreme Court, the American Supreme Court, has been hearing arguments on whether the former president is immune from prosecution over acts he carried out while in office. That hearing has just ended. What do you make of what has been unfolding there?
Yeah, I haven't seen any of the direct news yet, Charles, and it is great to see you again. It has been a while, but I think the president made some good points, and I think this is a very important case in front of the Supreme Court, and it will, as the president pointed out, it's not just about Trump. I think the media and left, Democratic complex on the left would like it to be about Trump, but it is about the office of the presidency, not just about this president. And I think the precedent will be important. There are statutes on the books that do protect the president and gives the president immunity. Nixon versus Fitzgerald, which was a case that went to the Supreme Court in 1982, really defined the separation of powers that demands absolute immunity from acts that the president is involved with, as long as they're within what they define as the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibility. So I think that's what they're addressing today, and I hope that I hope the announcement is clear and is really well defined, so that future presidents don't have to worry about this.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Mr. Swenson, you mentioned the Nixon case. I mean, Nixon's case, President Ford took a preemptive decision to stop him from ending up being prosecuted, just in case he is. So that did not actually determine what the Supreme Court is now trying to determine today. And so far, though, I mean, the proceedings, I watched a bit of it live. It's difficult to predict how the court might rule, isn't it? Because, I mean, the justices, some of them have expressed skepticism towards Mr. Trump's claim of blanket immunity, but they also seem reluctant to endorse the assertion by the prosecution that presidents are open to criminal prosecutions even for clearly official actions. And you were talking earlier about a precedent. At the risk of making you repeat yourself, how important a precedent is their decision likely to set?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is very important. The Nixon versus Fitzgerald was actually a civil case. So one of the points they have to discuss or address is whether this also applies to criminal cases. And I think if you look at the statute, it probably does. But then the real question, and it's a great point you brought up, Charles, was his behavior after the election of 2020, was that within the so-called outer perimeter? You could argue that it is, but it's not really straight down the line, obvious answer. So that's the real question. That they surely don't want to allow presidents to commit criminal acts, even if they're related to their office or their decision-making process. But I think what's important is that the president needs some immunity, and I think that it's a slippery slope. If they rule against Trump on this, I think you'll see future presidents being indicted for all kinds of crimes. And you could even look at what President Biden is doing right now. You know, some of the unconstitutional things he's doing, like violating the laws that were passed by Congress regarding the border and creating the open border, or moving student loan payments from the student loan borrowers to the taxpayers. That's against the Constitution, against the balance of powers, and a violation of laws that were passed by the Congress. So the balance of power here is really important. And I think this is, unfortunately, again, not having a view on whether what he did in January of 21 was within his limits. That's up for the court to decide. But this is just, unfortunately, another example of Trump's opponents in their obsession with taking down the president, or President Trump, stretching the law, and it really degrades American institutions. And you can look at the Russia collusion hoax as the first great example of that. But I think this is a really critical case for the court, and we'll definitely bring some clarity to the question, Charles.
Well, you make some very interesting points there, Greg. Of course, as we said, the hearing arguments just concluded today. It'll take them weeks to come to a conclusion, possibly not till the end of June, from what I understand. Given that the beginning of any trial, depending on the outcome of this case, will have been significantly delayed. I mean, Trump trials, and could go beyond the election date in November, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's true. I think from a purely tactical perspective, I would imagine the president wants to delay these trials as much as possible. But what's interesting in terms of the timing is that none of these cases were brought until the president announced that he was running for president again. And that sort of indicates that these are political in nature. They've had this evidence on this particular case. They've had it for almost 4 years, and yet they chose not to do anything about it in the first 2 years. In other words, giving him a pass, but then when he announced he was running again and was going to become a political opponent, then they filed the indictments. That just doesn't smell right. The most obvious is the Alvin Bragg case that is going on in New York right now. They've had that evidence for 8 years, and they chose to do nothing about it until he announced he was running. So that's where I just see a little bit of hypocrisy, or maybe it's proving the case that the justice system is being weaponized against a political opponent. Surely they would have, if these were, if they were arguing that no one is above the law, they would have filed these charges or processed these indictments back in 2021 and 22. And in the case of Alvin Bragg, they would have done that in 2017 or 2018. So so there are definitely some timing issues, Charles. You bring up a good point, but it's too close to the election. The other thing I should point out is the Justice Department historically has chosen very deliberately, it's part of their norms and procedures, never to file an indictment in an election year. If it's within 9 or 12 months of an election, they choose to wait till after the election. This Biden Justice Department has violated those traditions and went ahead with prosecuting the president, quite obviously because he is a political opponent.
You are, of course, Mr. Swenson, an American citizen. What are you hearing about what your fellow American citizens are saying about this immunity issue? Is it split along party lines or what? I understand that polls suggest that more than half of Americans think the president should not be immune from all prosecution.
Yeah, no, Charles, it's a really interesting point because Americans are quite divided. So it's no surprise that it typically goes along political lines. The Democrats think, he should be prosecuted. Republicans think he should not. That's probably not a shock to anyone. But I think what's more important is the independents, the undecided voters, as well as Democrats who might not like President Trump and have not voted for him. And I think I'll mention Alan Dershowitz as an obvious example. He's a legal scholar. He's a famous criminal defense lawyer, but he's voted against Trump twice. He plans on voting against him for the third time. But what's important is not weaponizing the justice system. Let the voters decide. And I think that's what's important here. Keeping him off the ballots in several states, which failed, but it was a really shameless attempt at removing him from the ballots and not letting the voters decide. So in many ways, this is the ultimate election interference, but using the courts and using the justice system to do it. So I would hope that some Democrats see this. And again, if you don't like President Trump, don't vote for him. I understand that, but let the voters decide.
Greg, thanks very much indeed. Very illuminating
Charles.
analysis there. Greg Swenson is a Republican strategist. He was talking to me there from London.